Aimee, if fandom makes people happier, more optimistic, and more trusting, why do we still treat sports as a guilty pleasure instead of a genuine life investment?
Great question. I think probably people have not necessarily thought of being a sports fan as being part of a bigger community or relational. So it just seems like something, frivolous or um, a waste of time to other people, not knowing just all the benefits.
That it brings about the community?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
One time,
All right. Welcome to Sideline Society. I'm Melanie, here with my co-host, Aimee. Hi.
Hey.
And this is where we go beyond the scoreboard and into the stories and the people that make sports so much more than what you see on the surface. All right, let's begin by kicking off our first segment. This is called the kickoff. And the kickoff is where we break down some of the biggest sports moments from the week. April 12th, 18-year-old Australian sprinter Gout ran 19.67 seconds at the Australian Athletics Championships, which was faster than Usain Bolt. Do you know who Usain Bolt is?
I thought I did, but I was wrong. I thought he was the guy that was the double amputee, but that is...
Nope, different country, background, the whole thing, but nice try. Well, so Gout, there was a lot of negative comments about his race because people thought that it was fake. They said, well, it's not legit unless you do it in another country. And they even questioned the conditions, more specifically the tailwind. I guess what they do is they record tailwinds during these races. And the legal limit of a tailwind is 2.0 meters per second. 2.0, excuse me. Not 2.0, 2.0 meters per second.
I was hoping
his tailwind was recorded at 1.7 meters per second, which made it legal. So he just said, people are just going to have to deal and I'll just keep racing and we'll just see how it goes.
Who decided to make such strict rules with running? Like country matters? That seems a little ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people who cheat, but how can you prevent a tailwind? Everyone's gotta have a say. So on to the next one. April 16th, Marie-Louise Etta made history becoming the first woman to take charge of a men's soccer team in one of Europe's top 5 leagues, appointed interim head coach of Union Berlin in the Bundesliga. Known as Louie, she's no stranger to breaking barriers, but she's already the first female assistant coach in the men's Bundesliga back in 2023. I'm probably butchering this name, so my apologies. More fans are welcoming this, but she has had some pushback with waves of sexist abuse on social media. And she came out and said, well, that just says more about them than it does about me. Let's just move on. So what do you think?
I love that she took the high road with all of those old trolls. And I love that women are starting to get the recognition they deserve and that it's not just men being able to coach women, that women have a lot of value that they can bring to teams regardless of the gender.
Yeah, no, I agree. You're seeing that in the NFL with women referees. So kind of slipping in there a little bit. Okay, next one. Fresh off winning their first ever NCAA national championship, UCLA women's basketball made history on April 13th at the WNBA draft. 6 Bruins were selected, breaking the record for most players drafted from a single school in one draft. 5 of them went in the first round, and also that was a new record. So go Bruins, place that my husband went, so kind of had to put that in there as well. But we love that UCLA won their first ever. And then they also made history with this.
So where are they going? I wouldn't know. I don't know why I asked that.
They're spread throughout. I'll get back to you on that one. I don't have that in my notes right now. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared.
Just a detail.
All right. April 12th, Rory McIlroy won the Masters for the second year in a row. becoming just the fourth player in the tournament's 90-year history to win back-to-back green jackets. You've been there. You used to live in Augusta. You've
Sure
been there. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, people love their golf there, and I did get the chance to go, even though I didn't want to go because I didn't really know anything about it. But it ended up being great. I think I tell everyone that the best part about it is the cheap food. You can get a pimento cheese sandwich or an egg salad sandwich for like less than $2, a beer for like
Oh,
two or
wow.
$3. So yeah, and then there's golf
And that's
happening.
why you went?
Yeah, there's golf happening while this restaurant is serving wonderful dishes.
You went to a bar and there was golf being played. Awesome. Well, I would love to be able to go. McIlroy held the largest 36-hole lead in Masters history, then nearly gave it all away before holding on for a one-shot victory over world number one Scotty Scheffler. So well done to him. Also, it's a little fun fact. When they win, they get to host a dinner. I think the following year they get to host a dinner. And Rory, he out of, I don't know how many people, top 5 or 10, but they ranked his dinner choice as one of the worst choices from people in the previous ones. So I'll have to look up what they had or what he was serving, but it sounds like it wasn't ideal. No steak and lobster, but that's okay. He won. He now is on to his second. He can do an even worse dinner, or he can step it up for next year.
I know. I really want to know. Maybe people want.
Well, it's based on their background, and I believe he is Irish. I say that, and I could be. People could be mad at me. He's Irish, or oh gosh, this is terrible. I should know. Okay, well, we're gonna move on.
Well, I thought his name was
this.
Roy for the longest time. I didn't know it was Rory. Quite as bad as but
not even close. Not even close. All right. Before we get to our guest, it's time for our flags of the week. This is called Flag on the Play, where we call it like we see it. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to do my flag is for Sharon Moore, who he ended up getting sentenced to 18 months probation and fined just over $1,000. What did he do, you ask? Well, he was the University of Michigan head football coach, and he was in a long extramarital affair with someone from his staff, and she broke it off with him, and he ended up breaking into her place and grabbing butter knives and scissors, because butter knives really can take people to a new level, and he threatened to kill himself, and the cops were called. And then he is where he's at now. And one thing that the judge said to him was that the person saving you from the full wrath of this court is the one you betrayed. And he pointed to his wife. So his wife has been by his side this entire time and continues to be by his side. So that's my flag on the play, because
it's trash.
There's so many flags of different levels of what this man has done.
Yeah. And I guess I don't understand like how the judge is saying that she's what saved him. Like, why does it matter if she's standing by him or not? Like, why does that factor into all of this? She should, I think regardless of if she stood by him or not, the judge should have just thrown the book at him. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. You can't misbehave and then because someone stands by you, you get less of a sentence. All right. I'd love to hear your flag on the play.
Mine is a little less intense. There's really not a flag on the play. It's just the fact that over in Japan for the last few years, they have started competitive office chair races, and it gets pretty serious. They showed a picture of someone in running shoes. So,
the person sitting in the chair or the person running? Both.
I don't know. They just kind of left it as like, your guess is as good as mine. You don't know. I kind of think that they should be wearing like high heels or something, because if you're working in the office, some people still do wear high heels.
I mean, I remember doing this back in the day when I worked my corporate job. I remember being in those chairs and spinning around, and definitely going down the hall with them when, it's a Friday afternoon. So I think I'd probably do really well in this.
I was going to say you're probably more amateur level right now, but we can get a team and we can become competitive, I think.
Yep, and fly over to Japan.
Nope, we're bringing it here.
Okay, we'll, we'll start it here in the U.S. Hopefully, it catches on for the next Summer Olympics or winter. I don't know. Could it be winter?
No, I want it summer, I think. Well, no, because it's done inside. I mean, it looks like they did it outside. Anyway, maybe it's so popular.
It could be
Yeah,
both. It's going to be on both.
it's going to replace curling.
I don't know. We'll see. That feels like a bit
That's
much. True. All right. Well, now that the flags have been thrown, let's get to the good stuff. My guest today is Ben Valenta, SVP of Strategy and Analytics at Fox Sports and co-author of Fans Have More Friends. His argument that being a sports fan might actually be the cure for loneliness and polarization. Here's our conversation. Today, I'm joined by Ben Valenta of Fox Sports, an author and researcher exploring the powerful connection between sports and human relationships. His book, Fans Have More Friends, dives into how being a fan goes far beyond the game and why it might actually help us feel more connected in an increasingly disconnected world. Hi, Ben.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to kind of get down to the nitty gritty of this. I think this book is exactly why I've started this podcast, and I'm looking forward to it. I am going to start with an icebreaker question for you. What would you say is the most ridiculous superstition you've ever followed during a game?
Nothing too crazy. I wish I had a better answer to the question. I think I would sit in a particular corner of the couch and then would have to sit in that corner of the couch, but nothing beyond that, nothing too crazy. Although I guess maybe like the premise of the question is kind of crazy. So anytime you do any of those things, it's a little crazy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. My daughter is in high school and they did really well. And I literally wore the same shirt, sweatshirt, jeans, shoes, everything down, like probably for like 6 weeks. So
Hey, if it works.
yeah, I mean, they didn't win the finals, but I feel like it got them that far, thanks to me and my superstition. So, okay, well, I would love to kind of hear how you started the book, why you started your book, Fans Have More Friends.
Yeah, so I mean, I think part of it is it helps to sort of take a step back and understand that this is my job. And so I've been thinking about sports fans as consumers for a long time. So my professional background is in consulting, and effectively the job comes down to answering the question, why do people do what they do? And so I have asked that question in a variety of different consumer categories. So everything from sports media and sports fandom to beer to foot fungal cream, you name it, riding lawnmowers. I've done it. I've spent time in the category. But it's always the same question. It's why do people do what they do? And then when you have that understanding, then you can answer a series of more business related questions because you have a center of gravity and a point of view on the category and the consumer. And so I've been thinking about this idea of sports fandom for a long time from that angle, from that perch. Why do people do what they do? And then how can we leverage that if you're in the sports business to meet consumers where they're at and provide them a better experience? And so this goes back, my journey here on Fandom goes back to, 15 years ago working on ESPN. That evolved into the New York Knicks, the New York Rangers. And it was when I got to that team level, I'm thinking about specifically, why do season ticket holders do what they do? Why do they buy season tickets? That's where the journey really starts here, because where we landed on those particular projects, it all came back to community. So there's this great line that we came to with the Knicks that was, to be a fan is to be a part of a community. And so we were trying to reframe this season ticket purchase decision, not around the entertainment on the floor, but on the community people experience in the stadium, like in the seats next to them in their section, when they walk into the stadium, and even when they're just out on the street, how it impacts their identity as they walk through the streets of New York, knowing that they're a Knicks season ticket holder. And so this notion of community kind of goes back, it's probably been 12 years at this point, goes back a long time. And it sort of just floated around. And at a certain point, I transitioned out of that consulting role into a full-time position at Fox Sports. And again, this is the job. Why do people do what they do? And so I started investigating other facets of fandom and arrived at very similar conclusions. Everywhere we looked, it was about community. Everywhere we looked, it was ultimately about belonging and a sense of connection among people. And people accepted this idea, this insight intuitively. I think we all recognize when you talk about fandom that yes, when I see someone wearing a Denver Broncos shirt on an airplane and I say, go Broncos, there is this sort of like nod of approval and a moment of connection between strangers. They also recognize like, this is the thing that I share with my kid or my father, whoever it might be. This is the thing that brings my group of college friends together, so on and so forth. So everyone kind of recognizes this intuitively, but from a business perspective, at least, we would leave that alone. We would sort of like say, yes, I assent, you are correct. This is the animating life force of fandom is this social connective force, but then they would turn and do something different in their sort of professional mode. And so where we got to was we need a more testable hypothesis. And that is this idea of fans will have more friends. So if it's true that fandom is about community, to be a fan is to be a part of a community, then what would follow, what is actually measurable, is you would see a tangible, measurable impact on their number of friendships. And lo and behold, that's what we find, is the bigger the fan you are, the more friends you're going to have.
I would say, going back to the Knicks, I think one thing in your book that I really liked was the father who had the season tickets to the Knicks, and the Knicks weren't doing great. And it's like, why do I continue to have these season tickets? And I guess he has sons that were going with him, and realizing that the Knicks weren't great, probably terrible at some point, but it was the one thing, maybe not the one thing, but something that he was able to do with his sons, one in particular, to go to these games. And that was a time that they could spend together, and not really realizing like, oh, maybe that is kind of why I'm buying. Not really that I like the Knicks, but this is just more of a bonding experience with my family. Do you excuse me, do you find that that's, common with fans, or is this something that is unique to the experience?
So that story you're referencing, Greg Armstrong, he's actually kind of a famous Knicks fan now. He wasn't when we met him, but he's sort of become this kind of avatar of Knicks fandom. And so when you walk around the garden in New York, you actually see images of Greg on the wall now. He was the person, the story that unlocked the insight here, that not as the way you framed it was, is this a common experience? This is the experience. There is no other fan experience. Now, what this does is reframes the entire notion of engagement in sports fandom around these relationships. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a father-son dynamic or a parent-child dynamic, but the way I've come to view fandom is when you see someone increasing in their fan engagement, what you will find underneath that is a very active, vibrant social network. If you see someone their fandom is waning, they are less engaged, there's less urgency to watch the game, so on and so forth, what you will find there is a fracturing social network underneath that. And so this is the fundamental insight. This is what drives fan engagement of all types. No matter what, it always comes back to this idea. Now, at a certain point, this becomes ingrained in your identity, and it's impossible to almost separate these things out from your personal identity to your social networks. But it is, at the end of the day, entirely motivated by the desire to connect. And we don't necessarily, as fans, we're not conscious of this necessarily as we move through the world. But if you sit back and you observe any fan and you unpack their social networks and you unpack their fandom and you sort of like map it out in front of you on a desk, which we do all the time, what you will find is that it's all connected back to these relationships. And when those relationships are active and we have frequent interactions, we're going to be more engaged fans. When we're more engaged fans, we're going to have more frequent interactions and more active social networks. And so these things start to work together to create social energy in our lives. But this is the proper way to understand fandom. It's about socializing. And so it is both the incentive and the benefit of being an engaged fan is you have more active, more frequent social interactions.
So this book came out in the heart of COVID. How would you say COVID shaped this book? You talk about the loneliness aspect, and I know COVID really either sent people in a direction of, community, but I know there was a lot of people who felt very lonely during COVID. Did COVID shape the book, the way the book went?
Yeah, I mean, I think like personally, it sort of gave us the space to write the book. I don't know that we set out when we first started to gather some of the data and kind of build our case that we ever envisioned it being a book. But then the pandemic happened, and some people baked sourdough, and we wrote a book. So that kind of happened. But then on parallel path, like in a macro level, culturally, yes, I think loneliness, the idea of loneliness, kind of came to the foreground for people. Now I think it's just kind of part of the way we talk about the plight of the sort of like the modern human. So there's space where we talk about this as like a social media phenomenon or a tech phenomenon, or just like the modern life kind of driving us further and further into our own sort of isolated shells. And so I think the pandemic kind of shone a spotlight on that idea. It was already there. I think pre-pandemic, we had a lot of the conditions that were leading to a loneliness epidemic. I think the pandemic accelerated that, shone a spotlight on it, and kind of made us more aware of it. The Surgeon General, somewhere along the way, releases a report on the threat, the health threat of loneliness in the U.S. And so I think people are just more aware of it now, and it sort of coincided with our thinking around the socialization aspect of fandom, loneliness being a problem, and as these things kind of like emerged from our brains and then the culture at large, it sort of just made sense to put them together. And that, if we have a thing, fandom, that people are already doing, and there are positive effects on their social networks as a result of doing it, and at the same time, loneliness is a problem, well, now we have not the antidote, it doesn't solve one for one the loneliness problem, but it is a contributing force because it operates at such a scale that we can talk about moving the wellness outcome for tens of millions. At a population level, we're talking about changing the quality of people's life. And so then that sort of put us on a path from being like practitioners in the space, professionals with a novel insight around how the category operates, to advocates for the power of fandom to do good for the world.
Would you say that as you're collecting data, doing the research, how did writing the book change your views of fandom, or did it?
Well, I mean, I think it just crystallized what we felt to be true. I think it made us confront how big an idea this is. There are a lot of different things people can do to improve their life. Most of those things require a change of behavior. It requires a tremendous amount of discipline. It's hard. And as a result, people will fall short. Try as you might to have a better diet, or to drink less, or to exercise more, or to whatever the thing might be. Like, I think we recognize that there are some positive things we could do for ourselves, but it requires effort. And I think what's interesting about this is it doesn't. It's a thing that we're already engaged with. So we're talking about a thing that, I don't know, roughly speaking, let's say 100 to 120 million adults in America today already participate in. They're already doing it. There's 40 million of them that are really engaged in this thing. And all we're doing is saying, hey, you 40 million people who are really engaged in this thing, you love this thing, it's a passion of yours, it's really good for you, do it more. Invite more people in. You can use it as a tool to bring people in, to create community. And so do that. And I think that is the thing that the book really illuminated for me, was this idea that there's this positive thing that people are already doing, and they just need to do it more. And so it's not requiring some sort of wholesale change of behavior. It doesn't require you to reorient your life in some way that is challenging or difficult. It simply requires you to recognize the power of the thing that you already love and then use it. And that change, I think, really opened our eyes to the potential impact that this could have for society at large. And I think when we talk about in these terms of like societal good, people tend to, and maybe this is me just being self-conscious, but they tend to sort of roll their eyes or think maybe he's being hyperbolic. And I'm not. I'm really talking about changing the mental health outcomes of tens of millions of people around this country, around the world.
What would you say for someone who didn't really grow up with sports, doesn't really have the fandom in their life? How would this book help them? What would you say to them? Because I know I have so many people in my life who never grew up playing sports. Their parents never did it. And really a big reason, selfishly, why I started this podcast was to be able to connect more people, to talk to more people about sports. What would be a step? Read the book, go to a bar, join a club? How do we get more people to become fans?
I think there's two pieces of this. One is I think it's just change your conception of fandom. So we touch on this a lot in the book, and there is a current conception that we have culturally of fandom that is, it's sort of lowbrow. It's broy, it's kind of boorish. it's like, oh yeah, that's what those people do. And we sort of look down our nose. If you're sort of like a coastal elite who's intellectual and into culture and music and art, you could very easily be in a circle, in a clique that looks down at the jocks. And I think that's a disservice to sports, right? I think we underestimate the power that this can have. And so there's this kind of aura around fandom that it's just this kind of frivolous waste of time. And I think it's what we're arguing for really is just to like reframe that. And so I think if you're not a fan, at the very least, just don't be dismissive of fandom, right? Be open-minded about the idea that this can connect people. Maybe it's not you, but people. And then I think it's, if you have that open mind, then you can take up the invite to go to the bar to watch the game, right? Like see it as it's not about the game. It's actually not about the game. It's about connecting with other people. And you can use this thing as a tool to connect to other people because it creates a third thing that eases social interaction. That's really what's going on here at a sociological level. And so I think if someone is maybe skeptical of these ideas, just like be open-minded and then allow that to kind of operate in the space as you normally would. Now, if you are acutely experiencing loneliness and you've moved to a new place and you want to generate community, you want to have more connection, then yeah, you can just use this as a tool. Go on a Sunday, go to the bar that has all the TVs and hang out, and you'll start to meet people. It is much easier to do it on a Sunday when there's football on and there's a bunch of football fans watching football than if you went on Tuesday when there's no football on and there's just a bunch of strangers in a bar. I think that it's really just sort of seeing it for what it is and then leveraging it and not getting hung up in like the sort of like the sports ball go team kind of dismissiveness and just saying, no, these people are just connecting over a thing and it's very easy to connect over that thing. And I think slowly what you find is that that's the only way you'll get into it is by the way that you and I got into it. We were young. We shared fandoms with our families. It became our friends. Slowly over time, enough energy is created through the interplay between those two things, engaging as a fan, social interactions that lead to more engagement as a fan, that incentivize more social interactions and so on and so forth. Like this thing starts to build and we become fans over time. And I think that that's the same way it happens as an adult. It's much harder. You have to be more intentional about it, but it's possible, right? And you'll start to care more about the things when you care more about the people who you're engaging with about the thing.
Mm-hmm. Kind of something to add on to that. I did an interview with women for fantasy football, and one of my friends knows nothing about sports, nothing about football. And the reason why, she's been doing fantasy football with her work for like 11, 12, 13 years. And she's like, I still don't know anything about football. I just keep coming back because I want to be the girl that beats the boys and have that banter. And it's something as simple as that, as joining a fantasy football league, not knowing anything about it, but just the thing that keeps her coming back is the banter and the connection. And I think she won the first time and when she just started. And so now she's like, I got to have that feeling again. I want to be able to kind of feel that. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. It's just, this is people coming back to be able to have this connection, to have those feelings.
Absolutely. The banter and the connection is the thing that keeps us all coming back. It's not limited to someone who's not a fan or women, or the reason that I engage the way that I do in sports fandom in general. The reason I join all the fantasy leagues is because of the banter and the connection. Like that is the thing. So I have a bunch of very active text threads. I see my friends more regularly as a result of sports. We do fantasy football drafts. We go see games together. These are all interactions, in-person interactions that keep and maintain these friendships that would otherwise not take place without sports. And it's very much that simple. Now, you were asking about like sort of what changed. It's not so much my view of fandom, but rather I now just say yes to every invite I get to a pool in the office. Yes. Any fantasy league. Yes. Because it's not about the fantasy league. It's not about it doesn't require that much time. It's going to generate more interaction and the interaction is good. And if you sort of see it as that, then it's impossible to say no to that because it's just more frequent and more depth of interaction for your life.
Yeah. No, I like that you said that you just say yes to everything. I think it's important also for people who are listening to maybe be like, oh, well, there's George over here who doesn't really participate or doesn't know anything about sports, but maybe this is my time to invite him to the fantasy football league or to do these things and to really kind of just branch out. And it's not just a bro culture. For fandom, how would you say it's different than politics or social movements or religious groups? Those are all kind of ways that people connect. How does fandom differentiate between those?
I think it's just a safe space. I think that's probably the superpower of sports fandom, is that it's not like some of those things that you mentioned are like nodes of community, which are important. And I'm pro connection and community, no matter how we find it. What I would say is that some of those things can be divisive and they can create in and out groups that are putting up barriers. So, there's cliche sayings about like, don't talk politics and religion at the table for good reason. Sports does not run afoul of that. Like sports is kind of fair game. Even if you find your tribe politically, let's say, and you find people that you connect with, that's a good thing. But I think we should be aware of putting up boundaries and creating the in and out group where it's like us versus them. Mm-hmm. And so this is an important point because I think sometimes people will say, if you're listening and you're skeptical and you would say, well, yeah, but there is an in and out group. There's one team versus the other team. And I think that is a misread of how fandom actually operates. Because we talk about rivalry, we talk about like hate in a sports context, and everyone knows that the semantics of that are different. When we say I hate Raiders fans, we don't literally mean hate in the true sense, right? And everyone understands that. And so this idea of rivalry, of in and out group as it pertains to like a sporting context is much different than we talk about like partisan politics, right? Or religious fervor. Like that's where it becomes a little bit more real hate. And so I think sports is just this safe space that exposes us, because it's this third thing that attracts a multitude of people and of diverse backgrounds and opinions and ethnicities and upbringings. As a result of that, it exposes us to the world and broadens our perspective. And so I think that is an important feature of sports that kind of gives it the ability to penetrate deeper and deeper into culture and to really move the needle for people in their individual lives.
Yeah. Does fandom show up differently between men and women?
Not really. What we find is that the bigger the fan you are, whether you're a man or a woman, you exhibit certain traits, certain characteristics. And when we make comparisons between men and women, depending on their level of fan engagement, we see that those groups they look very, very similar. The difference really comes in like the distribution of like the bigger fan, the more engaged fan. There are more men in that bucket than there are women. It's probably like 70-30, let's say. So of the 40 million American adults who are engaged fans, who we would classify as sort of big fans, we call them high value fans. Among those people, 70% of that 40 million are men, 30% are women. Those 30% and 70%, those men and women, they look very similar. And if you look at their character traits, you kind of measure their attitudes and their behaviors, they're going to look very similar. And so that's really the key difference that we see. There's just more men out there. Now, interestingly, and this is a little bit more of a qualitative finding, but we see it in some of the data as well. When you talk to those women, there is a very, very clear pattern that emerges. If you're an engaged female fan, you are the most socially connected person on the planet. You also exhibit confidence and an assertiveness that you don't see necessarily down the fan spectrum. And so there is something, and I don't know if it's causal, it's just correlated, but there is something about the engaged female fan. And I would sort of say, you kind of, to your point, like you were talking about your friend in the fantasy football league, is like you have to like hang with the boys. And there is some element of that has positive effects on the women we see who are engaged fans. We can measure that in the data where we see that like the bigger the female fan, the more likely they are to be responsible for managing household finances, making purchase decisions, so on and so forth, doing more tasks around the house, being more likely to be, and managing a household, managing kids. So you see some of these things kind of exhibited, but there is just like when you talk to the engaged female fan, you see, you sort of just, you encounter women who are assertive, confident, no bullshit. And there is just like, they're very refreshing conversations, very inspirational conversations, high energy people. That's true kind of across the board, but you really see it kind of crystallized in that female cohort.
How would we get more women involved in fandom? I guess that's my goal, is to one podcast at a time, but how do we get more women engaged?
I mean, I think the only way to get someone engaged, anyone, male, female, young, old, whatever it is, the only way that someone becomes an engaged fan is if the team, the sport, the thing becomes the centerpiece of relationships. That's the only way. There is no shortcut to fandom of any variety, right? Like fandom kind of works the same no matter the topic in question. Here's an example. I have an 8-year-old son. One day he came home and he was talking about Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. He had never seen, to my knowledge, Star Wars. And I said, hey, how do you know about these guys? Like, who are these guys? And he starts telling me the whole story of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and Han Solo and this big guy Chewie and the whole thing, the whole story. And I'm like, well, did you see the movie? And he's like, there's a movie? He's like, oh, you were just playing this. Some of your friends saw this and they were playing it on the schoolyard. And then he came home. And I said, buddy, I'm about to blow your mind. Yeah. And then we enter this universe of Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
And so this pattern starts to emerge. He comes home from school. He watches Star Wars. He goes to school. He has positive social interaction around Star Wars. They play Star Wars. He comes home. He watches more. Then things start to change. Then he wants to go to the park. He wants to buy the merch. He wants to do the Legos. That's how fandom works. It's the exact same story for how you and I became Denver Bronco fans. And so I think this same pattern can emerge in other things. You will get more into yoga if you're going to do yoga with your friends, right? Like you'll get more into wine if you are drinking wine with your friends. If you go to the Alameda Tap House and you get into the beer because it's a positive social interaction, you will then get more into the thing, right? Like so fandom works the same way. And so there is no way to just like snap your fingers and create new fans without the repetition of those social interactions.
Right.
And so when it comes to how do we create more female fans, it is one, I think we have to recognize that it's a long-term process. And then two, we have to make people aware that it has a positive effect on them. And then it has to be social. So it's about inviting, person to person, inviting women in to go to the bar on Sunday and to watch the game. Mm-hmm. It's about inviting women in to join the fantasy football league. It's about finding those like low cost entry points where it creates social interaction. And that is positive, and that makes us want to come back for more. And that's really what this is about. So the only way to do it is to make the team, the league, the sport, the centerpiece of these interactions. And then how do you facilitate more of those interactions?
Right. How does fandom deal with the negative aspects? It's like you see parents fighting in the field, or you hear people yelling horrible things.
They are there. I think so. This sort of question, I think there's a couple different ways that I think about it. One is these instances that we describe, they tend to go viral and they tend to be not normal. So the vast majority, 99% of sports fans never get in a fight in a stadium. Most fans never even see a fight in a stadium, right? Now, a fight will happen in a stadium and then that will go viral and it feels like, oh, this is who the sports fans are. The team wins the championship and the vast majority of people celebrate in very sort of like loving, wholesome ways. And yet one group of people is drunk and they overturn a car and they light it on fire. And it's like that becomes the face of fandom. So I think some of it's just like parsing out like the actual reality, which is this is by and large, vast majority wholesome. And so that's kind of one thing. Two, I think we kind of like lay the blame at the feet of sports when it's really just people, right? Like, hey, unfortunately, there are bad people out there. There are unhinged people out there. There are people who are having a bad day. And this is a context where we see them lose it. And so I don't know. You don't strike me as a person who would get in a bar fight. I'm not a person who's ever been in a bar fight. So I'm also not a person who's going to get in a stadium fight. So if someone who gets in a fight at a stadium, or the couple you're describing who fights on the sidelines or whatever it is, like there are other issues at work here. We just happen to sort of see it because we're in a context where we see a lot of people. But it's to sort of say, oh, that's about sports. Like, no, I've never lit a car on fire. Like, it's not something that normal people do.
Yeah.
And so to say that like sports fans do that is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a group of people who are unhinged who, because sports is so vast and so mainstream and captures such a huge part of the population, yeah, you're going to get all sorts in that group. And some of them are going to behave badly. to say that that's like the fault of sports is, I think, just like a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation.
Yeah, I agree. In your book, can you break down the levels of fandom that you talk about? Because I think I've heard a few times that you've talked about it, and I want people to understand it within your book. Kind of, you've got a sports fan, and then you've got like a really big sports fan, and just the levels of that.
Yeah. So the way we think about this is it's very simple. It's along a spectrum of engagement, and so we call them. It's sort of a value score. It's a value spectrum. But basically, there's three groups of people. There are low value fans, mid value fans, high value fans. This is a way of just separating out people in surveys to be able to sort of like put people together who exhibit similar levels of engagement, right? And so typically the way like the industry would operate here is say, okay, Melanie, how big of a fan are you on a scale from 1 to 10? And you'd say, I'm a 9. And we would just sort of take that as, okay, she's a 9, she's a big fan. The problem with that is like your 9 and my 9 might be very different. So we encounter people all the time, professionally, but also just even like personally, where someone will say, oh, my wife will invite me to a dinner party with her friend. And it's like, oh, the new boyfriend, don't worry, he's a huge fan. He always talks about sports. And then you get with him and you're like, hey, so who's your team? He's like, I don't really have a team. Like, oh, okay. So what are you into? It's, I don't know. I went to one game like, a couple of years ago and like, and so like, there's just this disconnect. And so we recruit people professionally, like for focus groups. We'll bring people in. And so we'll go around the country and we'll say, okay, we need to find big fans to talk to them. And you'll ask people that question. Okay, how big of a fan are you? Okay, we have a bunch of 9s and 10s on the scale. They're in this room. And then they're like, yeah, huge Bronco fan. Okay, so who's the starting quarterback? Oh, I don't know. Or, oh, it's Russell Wilson, who for the listeners at home.
No, don't say that.
People will do. I mean, last year we were in New York. We were doing focus groups with Giants fans. And this woman was talking about how big of a Giants fan she was. And we were asking her about like other teams she was interested in. And she said the Seattle Seahawks. And we were like, okay, why Seattle? She's like, oh, I really like Russell Wilson. Now, so Russell Wilson used to be the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. She said she was a New York Giants fan. He was currently the quarterback for the New York Giants and had been in Denver between Seattle and New York. So it just kind of like, you realize like this woman said she's a huge fan. She has no idea. She's not a huge fan. So anyway, this is a problem for us when we talk about research. So what we had to do was we had to figure out a way to clearly and cleanly and efficiently and effectively put people in buckets. And so, okay, we can compare these different groups of people. And so what I've identified is it's not just about passion, it's also about action. So the bigger the fan, the more things you're going to do that fans do. And so we recognize that as sort of a fundamental truth here. And now we measure the activities, the fan activities that one partakes in. And then that goes into how we think about you as a fan. So if you say you're a big fan, Melanie, then we also want to know, okay, so what sports? And so you have a couple different sports that you're into, a couple different teams that you're into. Or what's your orientation to that sport? Like with the NFL, would you watch only your team, or would you watch any NFL game all the way down the line? Okay, so then what else do you do that fans do? Do you play fantasy sports? Do you listen to sports talk radio? Do you listen to sports podcasts? Do you follow sports related accounts on social media? Do you buy and wear merchandise? Do you go to games? All of these different activities that we do as fans, that goes into how we calculate you as a fan. And so then we basically just bucket you into 3 groups: low, medium, high on those activities. And so we can identify the people who do the most stuff. They're the bigger fans. People who have a toe in the water and they do the least amount of stuff, they're lower value fans. They're less frequent, less engaged fans. They less frequently do these things. And so that just unlocks now the comparisons we can make between groups. And so that methodological change really informs a lot of the work, because prior to that, we were not seeing big changes in the data, right? We would ask fans about their number of friends, right? And if you just rely on their own understanding, their own sort of self-diagnosis of their level of engagement, and you don't get into the things that they do as a result of that engagement, you are muddying the waters, and you get this muddled result from the data. If you can clearly separate people into groups where it's like, yes, these people are reliably engaged fans and people are reliably less engaged fans, you can then compare their level of friends as an example. You can see the patterns start to emerge more clearly because you're actually looking at the right people when you make those comparisons.
High value fans get along with low value fans, or it's just in general they have something in common? One's just a bigger fan than the other.
Yeah, somebody's just more engaged and somebody's less engaged. And again, this kind of works across different different categories. Some people are super into certain things and kind of into certain things. And that's just kind of how this works. Again, that the depth of your engagement comes back down to how many social interactions do you have? What's your social network like? Is it predicated, anchored by the thing in question? Then you're gonna be more into it. If it's not, then you're gonna be less into it. And that's just the reality of how it works.
Do you?
There's no animosity between these groups. They're all just fans.
Yeah.
It's just a way of kind of parsing out the people who are more into it and less into it.
Since you've done the research and this is your job, are you able to have a conversation with someone in 2 minutes and say, oh, they're a high value fan, or is it easy for you to spot now?
Yes, but it's also easy for you to spot. Like, this isn't some like superpower I have. I mean, I've thought about it a lot more, but like, you talk to somebody and you immediately know, like, if they're talking about the Broncos and they know who the coach is and they know how the team did last year and like moves they've made in the offseason, they're a big fan. If they're just like from Denver and they're like, yeah, I like the Broncos, and like you get the vibe that they're not that into it, you can sort of just tell. I think that the reason that we have to ask these questions and kind of get scientific about it is because we have to do this in a survey environment where we actually ask a survey, where we run a survey, we ask questions of people, 10,000 people. So how do you quickly identify whether a person is a fan or not a fan in that kind of environment where you're not able to ask some of those questions? Now, when we have an interaction, you just like have a gut feel immediately, like, oh yeah, this person's into it or this person's not into it. Now, there are certain markers that if you have fantasy football leagues and you have a team and you know a little bit about your team, it's safe to say you're into it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, then you're not. And it's pretty clear, I think, right away, the depth of your engagement.
Would you say that there's a difference between fandom, let's say United States and England?
We get this question a lot and we've looked into it. So we've run surveys in the UK, Germany, China, Brazil, and Mexico. And what we find is that fandom works the same way globally. What we find is we still see a positive relationship between your level of engagement and number of friends you have, how happy you are, your sort of level of like mental health. So it all kind of works the same. The difference is the positive impacts are magnified in the US. And so the hypothesis there is we have a much more robust sporting culture.
Mm-hmm.
We are year round in a cycle that's recurring of sports. And so it's the big sports that people think about, right? So it's the NFL that then leads into the NBA, which leads into MLB, and then it all starts over again. But we just got through a weekend with the Masters.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger the fan, the more likely you are to pay attention to something like the Masters. We just got through March Madness and the NCAA tournaments for men and women. The bigger the fan, the more likely you are to be into those things. And so there's these tent poles throughout the year beyond just the big leagues that we think about that lead to much deeper engagement among US fans compared to fans in other countries. So if you're a UK sports fan, you're really into soccer,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're really into the Premier League probably, and you have a team and you're going to those games on a regular basis and you're very engaged in the Premier League, and you probably have your eye on some of their domestic leagues around Europe, and you're definitely following the Champions League. And you probably also are going to be you're going to be into the golf, you're going to be into the tennis, there's some rugby, there's some cricket you're going to be into, but those things don't rise to the same level as going from NFL to NBA to MLB. Like, there really is like a very robust sporting culture here. And so we see just a bigger bump in the level of engagement, but then also the positive effects that come from that engagement. Because we really haven't fully articulated. So the bigger the fan you are, the more friends you have, the more likely you are to greatly value those friendships, the more likely you are to interact with those people. Same is all true for familiar relationships. So the way to think about that is the bigger the fan, the more likely to have a good relationship with your mother, right? Okay, so that's true. Then there's all these positive mental health outcomes that result from this. So it's not just that the bigger the fan you are, the more friends you have. Because you're a more social human being, you are going to be happier, more confident, more satisfied, more grateful. You are more likely to be registered to vote. You are more likely to give to charity. You are more likely to exercise. Like, there's a whole host of things that come downstream from that social engagement that fandom generates. And so we see this, that's why we talk about it sort of as a societal good, is the bigger the fan you are, the more likely you are to be engaged in society. And so that is also true in the UK, in Germany, in China, in Brazil, in Mexico. It's just we don't see it quite the jump from the less engaged to the more engaged that we do in the US, where the jump is significant.
Interesting. Do you have a personal fan moment of your own, not from the research specifically, that perfectly represents the message of this book?
I mean, absolutely. The thing that comes to mind is the first Broncos Super Bowl against the Packers. And I remember very clearly being with my family, my extended family in my house when this all goes down. And I think that that's sort of my first or second kind of like true fan memory. And it really is all just centered around family. Right? Like that's who's there. And it's funny. It's like that's still what my relationship with my dad is based on the Denver Broncos, right? Like that is what we talk about. And now it's the Denver Nuggets, right? And because of the season that we're in. And so there's that kind of just illustrates this idea that there's this like constant pull back home because of these teams. And it's the thing that facilitates those interactions. And as a result, I have a deeper relationship with my dad. And it's tied to those teams. And so I think that really kind of, we see what we talk about in the book, we see in our own personal lives. And that moment when the Broncos won that Super Bowl, it's like, braided with together with family that really kind of illustrates the whole thing for me.
Yeah, I love it. If someone dismisses sports and says it's just a game, what's the most compelling thing you would say?
I don't know. It's sort of like everything we've been talking about today. And so it's a little bit of a long walk. I think that generally speaking, talking about the bigger the fan, the less lonely, as measured by clinical questions that have been developed over time to measure loneliness and depression and anxiety among populations of people. These aren't my questions. These are questions that come from behavioral psychologists and sociologists that have been rigorously defined. When you talk about tens of millions of people being less lonely and loneliness being a plague on society, when you talk about tens of millions of people being more civically engaged, more likely to be voters, be more plugged in to their communities, I think it's really kind of hard to argue with that notion. It's not just sports. It's obviously something deeper. I think we all kind of feel that intuitively. What we're trying to do is sort of like put data and kind of fact behind that, and a kind of a way of framing this to think about it in a different way.
I kind of want to talk about social media. Do you think social media and technology strengthen fan communities, or do you think it's quietly eroded what makes the whole experience meaningful?
This is a little bit of a double-edged sword. So I think that social media can increase, like in specific acute instances, you could describe to me a scenario where social media was used as a platform to bring people together using sports, right? So there's some story that you could tell about like someone started in the Bay Area, a Denver Broncos get together group on Facebook and used social media for good to bring people together in real life. So that's true. So I kind of like recognize that. At the same time, what I would say is, in general, social media is bad, and the impact of social media is like runs in the opposite direction of what fandom does. And so I think generally as a sports business, we spend too much time thinking about like what our social media strategy is, because I think just like social media kind of at an abstract level, just the idea of social media is actually pulling us apart. It is isolating us. It pulls us into this little algorithmic screen where we're very narrow and sort of deep and kind of like not seeing the outside world. And I think what sports does, the beauty of sports when it operates, is it creates and facilitates connection between people. It specifically creates and facilitates connection that's in real life. And I think that's really good for us. So I think the isolated algorithmic experience of social media is pulling us apart and is bad, and just kind of further puts us in our own little cocoons. And I think sports brings us into the real world and it puts us in situations where we interact face to face with people in real life. I think that's good. So that's like the bigger point. But yes, but some critic of that line of thinking could say, well, what about the Bay Area moms group who gets together to watch the Bronco games that was facilitated by Instagram? And I'd say, great, that is good. But it's because of the in real life interaction that's what's creating the positive. It's not the getting lost on social media, scrolling endlessly, because that's just fundamentally bad.
Yeah. Something that I kind of was thinking about, just more specifically, the Super Bowl and social influencers. You see a lot of social influencers at the Super Bowl, and a lot of them don't play sports, maybe didn't play sports, and they get these boxes and they get all of these things. Is that beneficial to fandom?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a careful balance that like leagues and teams have to think about, because they're there because there's a lot of attention on the thing, right? It's not really about those sports at all. It's the same reason people sell, companies like Fox Sports sell spots in the Super Bowl for $8 million for 30 seconds. Like it's basically the same principle in operation. There's a lot of eyeballs and attention on this thing. We operate in an attention economy So therefore, you're going to see people like the sort of like influencers that you're describing at events like the Super Bowl. I think what you're putting your finger on is like a more fundamental tension that leagues and teams have to be aware of as we think about growing the pie of fans. And then like you can take the money up to a point, but at a certain point, it starts to lose what made it special.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it becomes too hard to be a fan, if it's too expensive to go to games, if it's an inauthentic experience where it's really just like for corporate interest,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't really actually even have fans in the stadium of the teams because it's gotten so big,
Mm-hmm.
then you don't suffer the consequences of that like in the one event or the next event, right? It's not this Super Bowl or the next Super Bowl where you suffer the consequences. It is in 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? You slowly like kind of like lose the magic of what brought people in. And I think that's the thing that we have to be aware of as a sports business. And so, but it's a tension kind of everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something to be aware of. I don't, that is an acute example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not particularly worried about that, but it also kind of like feels ick.
Yeah.
When you see it, and like the more ick you have, the more people are going to turn off. Right. And I think that like, that's the thing you have to be aware of.
Who do you think the book is really for?
When we started writing the book, we were starting for an audience that like in the business. It evolved into fans, and it like the bigger the fan, kind of just we're reframing this behavior not as something that you need to be ashamed of or dismissive of, but rather something that you should embrace and be proud of and try and share and extend and grow. You know, I think what's interesting about this is as we wrote the book, there's a sub chapter of a book that's about this idea of improving mental health outcomes and happiness, satisfaction, gratitude, optimism, confidence, et cetera, That's really like when I do podcasts or interviews or talk about the book, I end up talking mostly about that. And so there's a whole book probably to be written about that subsection of a chapter, because that's really the message. And so when you try to come back to your question about like who it's for those people who are engaged in this thing, and to say, hey, we want to encourage you to do more of this and to bring more and to use this as a tool. I think that's the thing that people don't appreciate about sports is it's really easy to use it to invite people in. It's a little funny to just text somebody you haven't talked to for a while, like, hey, hope you're well. You know, it can be kind of weird to like invite one of the dads from school over to just hang out in the backyard, right? Mm-hmm. Guess what? It's not weird to invite that dad over to watch a game, right? And it's not weird to invite that dad to bring their daughter along to join the kids and daughter fantasy football league, and then to use that as a jumping off point to like, hey, we're gonna watch this one game all together, right? We're gonna order some pizza. And like, I think we can just say if our objective is purely social, has nothing to do with sports, we can use this thing as a way to attract people and to sort of solve social coordination issues and to just make it easier to get together, to decrease the friction that comes with awkward social interaction, right? Like inviting that new dad over to just hang out in the backyard could be awkward. There will be awkward moments. Now you can fight through that, but it's friction that gets in the way of the next time and the next time and the next time. Invite someone over to watch the game is super easy, right? And it also facilitates the interaction because takes the pressure off the conversation because we have this thing to do. And I think that just seeing it for what it is and then using it is ultimately, I think, who the audience is for this.
I love that. If there's one thing you want someone to walk away believing after reading Fans Have More Friends, what is?
Well, it's that fandom is a force for good in society and can actually impact the world for good at a population level.
I have one last question. I ask everyone this, so completely unrelated to sports. If you could eat one thing every day with no consequences, what would it be? Oh, that was fast.
Yeah, it's always on my mind, so it's an easy one to answer.
What kind of pizza?
Any kind of pizza. That's the thing about pizza is there really isn't bad pizza.
Do you like pineapple?
I don't like pineapple, but if I have to, I will.
Perfect. I love that. Well, Ben, thank you so much for all of this. This is important for a lot of people, and I think getting the word out that it's pretty easy, maybe not to a lot of people, but just figuring out ways to be inclusive and to get more people to become any level of fans, whether you're low level or high level.
Keep on keeping on with the podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And good luck with your book. And
Thanks, Melanie.
okay. Okay. There's a lot to talk about. Question for you. Since you work in the mental health industry, is this something you would promote, Fandom?
Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important to have connections and feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And this gives people the opportunity to do that and connect and commiserate for the wins and the losses and getting people out of the house, or even just connecting through like fantasy football or virtual chats or whatever.
Yeah. Would you actually, I'm going to call you out in front of everyone. You didn't play a lot of sports growing up.
No, I did not.
There's nothing wrong with that. This is why I'm asking this question, is because you are now doing CrossFit. And do you feel that with CrossFit, it has brought you a sense of community? Do you wish you would have done something like this sooner? Or tell us about CrossFit.
Yeah, I love you bringing up all of that. No, I did not play sports much when I was younger. Don't have the coordination gene. Did a lot of hiking, mostly with myself, my dogs. So then, yes, around 4 years ago, I started doing CrossFit. I was trying something new, and I knew that I loved it. I loved the variety of movements, etc. But what has kept me coming back and doing something longer than 2 or 3 months at a time is the community. I work out at the same time mostly and have built relationships, people that I get together with outside of the gym. And those are things I couldn't find doing some of the other activities. I love it. And I'm still not athletic. Anyone can do it.
I mean, you build up to it for sure, but I think it's nice that you found a community and you guys now do stuff outside of CrossFit, and you're able to bring kids there, dogs, which is a nice, because you can relate on a different level as far as kids go, and then you can relate on a different level as far as dogs go. So I think that the whole premise of this book is just finding a way that we can connect with each other, and the positive, the mental health aspect of it being that, fans do have more friends and they have different levels of fandom. That doesn't mean that if you're at the low value, which he talks about, and if you're at the high value, that your value of friends are going to be different. It's just your conversation's going to be different. But what would you say for the book? Did anything stick out to you that you felt was like, did you disagree with something in the book? Were you just kind of like, well, I don't know. I guess this could be right.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agreed with most of what he said. There's one thing wouldn't say I disagree with necessarily. I just take a slightly different perspective of it, and that's the us versus them, seeing how it could be more of a negative. Or I took his messaging as us versus them mentality can be bad. And yes, that definitely can be true. And I think that there's a positive spin that you can take on it, which is, you're commiserating with others. It makes you feel again like you're part of something and other people aren't part of it. And it's not like it's not exclusionary, but you feel like you're part of something. So then it makes it so that you can banter with others and, jest, and it's all typically in good fun, minus, like he said, the few people that ruin it for everyone by starting fights and being aggressive.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true of pretty much everything. You're going to have black sheep that just kind of tarnish people doing good things. And, someone goes out and acts like an idiot and kind of ruins it. And then social media really kind of takes it to a whole different level. I would say, just
Always.
like he said, people filming things and then it coming out, and now it's like a million views. And do you think someone who plays a single sport is able to find that community? Do you think that that could be a possibility if you're playing tennis or if you're racing in track?
I think so. It may not look the same. It may be smaller scale, but I think about like running is typically more of a solo sport, but then they have running clubs now. They have where you meet up at a bar, you all go run, and then you drink. And so I think that people have gotten creative with how they can connect with people doing similar things as them. And yeah, again, it may not be on that larger scale where you're in a huge arena or, having big parties or whatnot, but you're still expanding your network and your relationships.
Yeah. What would you say? Is there one takeaway from this that you are going to go to CrossFit? You're going to talk to your friends and say, I read this book and I feel like we need to find ways to get more people into CrossFit, or I have friends who aren't really into sports. Maybe I can invite them to go watch games when I go over to a friend's house. What's a tip that you're going to bring forward?
I think just trying to connect with people that aren't necessarily in it. Like, I just assume that my friends, most of them aren't into sports and wouldn't want to get together and do those things, but I've never asked. And it's not necessarily something I'm big in. Like, I could go to a bar and watch it, but we'd be talking about other things. So probably like low value. But I would just say, if you are feeling lonely or disconnected or just wish you had a bigger support group, ask someone to do something to watch that, and maybe we'd all be pleasantly surprised by some of the relationships we could end up making.
Yeah. And it's one step to someone else being happier too. So okay, last question. If you could eat one thing every day with no consequences, what would it be?
I'm surprised.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I haven't thought about this before. Okay. Actually, all I do is think about food. Potatoes. First, it would be French fries, and then baked potatoes, and then, like throw the mashed potatoes, the twice baked potatoes, all those kind of together. Potato salad very last. That's trash. I don't need it.
You've obviously thought about this.
In the 2 seconds that you asked me and never having thought of it before. Have to have a lot of dipping sauces for the French fries. That almost makes it like a whole experience in itself.
Yep.
You have like your blue cheese, your ranch and your buffalo. Anywho.
Yep.
And then potato, it has to be fully loaded. Like, you can't do the skimping, trying to keep it light or healthy. You need like extra butter, extra sour cream, bacon bits, chives if they have it.
Yeah. I remember we used to put A1 steak sauce on our baked potato.
I remember that too. I will not do that again. I love the other stuff too much.
I can't think of the last time I had A1, so I think it would only be for baked potato.
I use it on my pork chops.
Oh, okay. I mean,
and steak. Yeah.
Well, then you need to have a better steak than putting A1 on it.
Oh, I just really like condiments.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, on that note, let's wrap things up. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and wins like a duck, Tracy Joyner recruited it. Big West Coach of the Year and Oregon women's soccer head coach joins us on the sideline next week. Don't miss it.
Quack, quack.
Thanks for listening to Sideline Society. And remember, there's always space for more people on the sideline. Bring someone into the game next time. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
That was amazing.